Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's poem, which is called Ozymandias, and by a very famous English romantic poet called Percy Shelley. So, just before we look at the poem, I wanted to spend a few minutes just talking through some of the best ways to study poetry at home. So, first of all, it's really important that you annotate, i.e., you make notes on the copy of the poem that you have. Those annotation notes will directly help you with your revision come year 11. These presentations, for number 2, will cover the context and background of the poem. We will look closely at the language, and we will also talk about the structure of the poem. It's also important that you make sure that you have notes on all 3 of those areas. It's also important for number 3 that you make sure you read the poem on your own. It's not enough just to listen to a recording of it. I would suggest that after you've listened to me read the poem, or even better before you listen, that you read it on your own and you make your own notes. There will be a few of you at home who don't have your anthology because you left it in school. My advice would be to print out a copy of the poem from the PowerPoint included here. If you can't do that for one reason or another, then at least create a list of notes that you'll be able to glue into your exercise book. You could also copy the poem out by hand on paper and then annotate it. Let's get started. So, key question is going to be, what does Ozymandias show us about power and time? Now, the name Ozymandias will seem rather strange and unique to you, but actually Ozymandias is a Greek name for an ancient Egyptian pharaoh called Ramses II. And Ramses II was a real-life historical ruler of ancient Egypt. So, Percy Shelley himself lived between 1792 and 1822. He was one of England's most famous romantic poets. Now, a romantic poet tends to believe in 2 things. Firstly, the power of nature. The Romantics moved away from society, looked away from science, and looked towards the natural world for their inspiration. But they also went inwards as well, into their own imaginations. And so the power of the imagination is also another key aspect of romantic poetry. Shelley himself was distrustful of power, and particularly those who wield authority and power over others. And it's often been said that the poem Ozymandias is his critique or criticism of the way that people believe that their power is unstoppable and will last forever into eternity. So have a look here. This here is Barack Obama. Now, when I first taught this poem, Barack Obama was the president of the United States, and at that point would therefore have been the most powerful man in the world. Now, of course, Donald Trump has taken over. So even now, some of that power that Barack Obama once wielded over America and the rest of the world has gone. But have a look at this. Over time, don't you think we'll probably forget Obama? 35 years' time, many will remember him. In 100 years' time, a few will. But he'll mainly be somebody who you study in history. 250 years' time, maybe some people will study him in school. Other people will be studying rulers who we've never heard of before. 500 years' time, and who knows, maybe in 1,000 years' time, there will be nobody left on the planet who's ever heard of Barack Obama. Here was a man who was the most powerful man in the world, yet in 1,000 years' time, it's quite likely nobody will know who he is or who he was. So what does this have to do with poetry? Well, We're going to be looking today at a poem that considers the idea of hubris or excessive pride. And somebody who is described as hubristic could be somebody like the picture of the guy here with the chest out, with a huge ego, an egocentric person. And often people believe that pride comes before a fall. Let's have a look at the poem and have a think about how it shows us hubris and how you might relate it to Barack Obama. Ozymandias. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on those lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." So, take a moment now to pause the video, read it through again, and perhaps once more, and quickly take a few notes, 2 or 3 perhaps, on the first things that stand out to you. Now you've done that, let's have a look at this quick image, because this sums up the poem. The poem itself is almost like a picture. It's one image. And in that image, we have a statue in a desert. There is not much left of the statue. We have its legs standing on the pedestal, which is the block that you can see underneath here. And lying a little way from it is the shattered visage, which is the shattered face of the statue, lying half sunk in the desert. Nothing around this remains. Okay, make sure you're taking notes at this point. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, it's interesting start this. Look at that adjective, antique. It suggests something from a long way back in the past. And I think it gives the story a bit of a sort of timeless and storybook feel, as if, like a fairy tale, this comes from a time long, long ago. Also, I think it's interesting that the speaker of the poem, the I of the poem, doesn't tell us the story. I met a traveller who said. So the story we see is the story that the traveller told the speaker. And we get a sense of stories within story, as if this story has been passed through the generations, passed from person to person by word of mouth. This story of the statue in the desert. Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Okay, so these legs of stone are vast, they're huge, they're trunkless. The trunk is your body minus your legs and your arms. So it's suggesting that the whole body has disappeared, and all that's left are these huge legs. And we get the sense of the pointlessness of what we see. Yes, it's big. Yes, it has a huge size, but actually it has no meaning left for the traveller who saw it. Then we move through. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies. Now, a visage is a face. Think of the word vision. Okay, shattered. So it's broken into plenty of pieces. Whose frown, think of a frown, it usually expresses some form of disapproval, and a wrinkled lip, okay, maybe disgust and sneer, okay, an extreme disgust. And then we see of cold command. So this tells us an awful lot more about this statue. This is a statue of somebody who was in command, in charge, in control, but they were cold. Look at that adjective. It is a metaphor for perhaps the heartlessness of this person. And so we get all of this imagery of the pride and arrogance of the leader, of Ozymandias, whose statue we're seeing. And it gives us a hint at his tyrannical rule. He was a tyrant. He oppressed his people. He took away their freedom. So even through time, we are getting a sense of what kind of leader he was. Okay, the next three lines are more complicated. Tell that its sculptor well those passions read. So the sculptor, the person who made the statue, was able to read Ozymandias's passions, i.e., his emotions. So it's a way of praising the sculptor and how well he drew Ozymandias's face in the stone, which yet survive. So while his power has gone, while the rest of his body has disintegrated into the desert, his facial features survive, and it's his facial features that are remembered, the cruelty that was written into his face. Now, these things, his facial features are stamped on these lifeless things. In other words, they are sort of impressed on that stone, on that lifeless stone. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And perhaps this is a hint of the sculptor's opinion of Ozymandias. He was mocking Ozymandias. So it's a really interesting poem here. And this first part gives us this idea of the cruelty that remains in the statue. Let's move on to the second part of the poem. And on the pedestal, these words appear. Remember, the pedestal is the stone that the legs of the statue are standing on. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Okay, so he declares here his name. And then he describes himself as being the King of Kings, the supreme king. And of course, for readers in the time that Shelley wrote the poem, King of Kings would have been a reference to God. And so we see Ozymandias describing himself as being godlike and having this sort of incredible authority. In the next line, again written on the pedestal, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. So what he's asking here is for anybody who arrives at that pedestal to look at his works. And I think this would probably be a reference to his works, the grand buildings and the city that would have surrounded the statue originally. Ye mighty, you mighty. So perhaps he is addressing the mighty rulers who might come, who might be traveling through or visiting his city, and he's asking them to despair, i.e., you will despair because my works, my city, my incredible buildings, and my power, which all of this symbolizes, will make you feel hopeless, will make you feel despair, because you can never be as powerful as me. There's also a subtle reference to God again here. Note the way that mighty is capitalized. The mighty was a word that was often used to describe God. So again, he might even be proclaiming to God himself that he, Ozymandias, is so powerful that even God will despair. So, At this point, we have the volta of the poem, the shift, because nothing beside remains. Despite Ozymandias' proud boasts, nothing remains. There is nothing there. His power has gone. Now, if you have a look at the comment in the top left there, you'll note that there's a colon there. Sometimes that's written as a full stop. It doesn't really matter. This provides the caesura, the pause in the line. And it gives us those three words on their own, nothing beside remains, and allows us to pause, to contemplate the completeness of the way that Ozymandias' power has diminished. It's vanished in a puff round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. So boundless means that it goes on forever. The lone and level sands stretch far away. So right at the end there, we have the alliteration in lone and level. And listen to the sounds of those words. They're elongated. Lone, level. And then we've got the S, what we call sibilants. Sands, stretch, far away. And we've got this repetitiveness in the sound. And we've got this sense of endlessness. And the desert in this poem is a metaphor for time, because the desert goes on and on into what seems like eternity, just like time. And so we are left with a statue. We are left with a once mighty king who has been defeated by time, by the power of nature. And he is now just an insignificant piece of stone. Okay, wow. And I hope you're beginning to think how this connects with Barack Obama or any leader living now, or indeed any of you sitting there at home. You will be forgotten. I will be forgotten. Everyone will be forgotten, because time is more powerful. In the grand history of the universe, we are nothing but mere motes of dust. We will be forgotten, I'm sorry to say. Now, you could take that as a depressing message, or you can take that as an opportunity to enjoy your life. Depends how you look at it. Let's have a brief look at structure. Now, the key idea here is the idea of an ironic contrast. And an ironic contrast is when two things are placed next to each other but don't work. So have a look here. We've got this lovely sign that I found in America. Welcome to colorful Colorado. And what you'll notice in the background are barren and bleak and empty hills. No color whatsoever. And it's ironic, of course, because the sign contrasts with the background. In the same way, Ozymandias is ironic because his proclamation of extreme, everlasting power contrasts with the fact that there is now nothing there apart from an empty and lonely desert. This is my favourite one, though. Thank you for driving carefully. And there is a car on its side in the ditch. An ironic contrast. So, why did Shelley choose to write a sonnet? Now, if you remember, a sonnet is a 14-line poem. You studied Sonnet 43. And when you were learning about Sonnet 43, your teachers would have told you that sonnets were traditionally written about love. So this poem doesn't seem to be about love at all. You could say that, or you could say again it's quite ironic, because the kind of love that we see here is Ozymandias' self-love, his love for himself. And the irony is that his self-love has been defeated by time. Another reason why he might have written it in the sonnet form is because sonnets are short and fleeting. That means they're over very quickly. They're brief. And just like his power and his legacy and the memory of him, it was over very quickly, ultimately forgotten. Now, just to finish off, here are your key ideas in the poem. Make sure you write these down somewhere because you will need them later. This is one of the most famous poems written in the English language. It's certainly Shelley's most famous, and it's devoted to this single metaphor. The notion that this statue stands for or represents power, and the way that power is vanquished or beaten by time, because power resides not in human beings but resides in nature and time. So the ruined statue is now merely a monument to one man's hubris, his pride, and it's a powerful statement about the insignificance of human beings to the passage of time. It's a metaphor for the ephemeral nature of political power. Now, the word ephemeral again means brief. It's kind of like a butterfly, I always think. A butterfly is ephemeral. It's beautiful as it lives, but it dies very quickly. They only last for a few days. And that's like power. It may be incredible in its time, but it will go eventually. And finally, here is a really interesting point. Shelley demonstrates that art and language outlasts the other legacies of power. Art is immortal. Think of it. The statue itself, even if it's broken, remains. We can still see its sneer of cold command on its face, the artistry of the sculptor. And even now, we are studying Ozymandias in school. We may have forgotten Shelley, we may have forgotten the original sculptor, we may have forgotten the statue, but the poem lives on as a piece of art. Art is more powerful, or as powerful as time, you might say. Okay. Thank you for listening, everybody. Do look back through the slideshow and pause it to help you with making your notes. As I say, it's really important that you understand the poem yourself. It's not enough just to make notes. Read it through, get a grasp of it, and most importantly, ask your teacher online if there's anything that you don't fully understand. Thank you for listening, and once again, goodbye and have a good day and stay safe. Thank you.